everybody? Friday! TGIF, it is Friday. Hey, how about the stock market, huh? Looking good, new all-time record highs. All right, Powell, a couple of days ago saying, hey, he was in that congressional testimony, the government's debt is on an unsustainable path. Now, we haven't heard that in a while. Previous Fed chairman, they said the same thing. They keep raising this. Every few years you hear this nonsense. This is perpetuating this lie that the government is somehow going to run, the United States government, the monopoly issuer of the US dollar, is somehow going to run out of dollars. It's not going to be able to service its liabilities. The government debt is on an unsustainable path, he says. It's going to infringe upon the Fed's ability to conduct monetary policy. That's ridiculous. That is garbage. That is nonsense. One thing has nothing to do with the other. First of all, let's understand something. The United States government, which is the monopoly issuer of the US dollar, cannot run out of dollars. The debt is not on an unsustainable path. And what is the debt anyway? The debt is dollars. Those are that 22 trillion. Those are dollars that have been spent by the U.S. government that have not been collected back in the form of taxes, and people hold those dollars, or institutions or even countries hold those dollars in the form of treasury securities, which are themselves dollars with a term and a coupon, meaning they have a duration like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, right? And the coupon means they have an interest payment attached. So in reality, there really is no debt. The government spends, the dollars go into the economy, and those dollars are just swapped for treasuries, which is like a savings account, and that earns some interest, okay? But this idea that the debt is on an unsustainable path, that is once again the perpetuation of a lie, a complete lie, or maybe just pure ignorance, I don't know, with Powell, really. I mean, you've had other Fed chairman, chairwoman, Yellen said the same thing, Bernanke said the same thing, Greenspan used to say the same thing. Is it ignorance? Is it a lie? Is it subversion? I have no idea. But it is very disappointing to hear this, but not out of the ordinary. I mean, this is what people believe. Most people believe this. That they equate the government's finances like with their own personal finances. That you need to tighten your belt, you need to balance your books, you can't run up debt. The difference being that the government is an issuer of the currency, and households, individuals, businesses, even some countries are not. All right, this is apples and oranges. You can't make the comparison. This is not an equal situation. But it's frustrating to hear somebody like Powell, because the lawmakers listening to his comments, they take it to heart. They believe that one day probably we will get a balanced budget amendment, and when that happens, it's going to be a disaster. The United States is basically going to become like Europe. And there's going to be high unemployment. There's going to be very weak, if any, economic growth for long periods of time. There could be constant rolling recessions. It's going to constrain the ability of the economy to grow. The economy needs money to grow, because basically, that's the way the system operates. The economy creates money when it grows. You're not going to have that. You're going to have a constraint on the ability of that money creation to happen. But this is all based in this false belief, this ignorance about the debt. And you get a guy like Powell, and he said crazy stuff before. Remember, when was it, back in January or back in March, he was asked specifically a question about MMT. Hey, what do you think about all this MMT stuff that we're hearing about? And he's like, nah, that's no good. That's junk. That stuff, nah, it's bad. It's wrong. I mean, he didn't even give a reason why it was wrong. He just dismissed it out of hand. It's wrong. So the debt is not on an unsustainable. By the way, if you go and in Times Square here in New York City, they got that debt clock, that ridiculous debt clock, which is ticking off numbers, and that's just put up there to scare people. And I always wonder, like, if you got a debt clock or a liability clock, whatever you want to call it, why don't you have an asset clock too, right? If you walk into a bank and you say, hey, I want to get a loan, or if somebody were to analyze or assess your financial worthiness, they would certainly look at your liabilities. You say, hey, here's my liabilities, here are all my debts. Okay? They would ask you, even if you did not provide that information, they would say, well, okay, great. Now, let's see your assets, let's see your income. That is never brought up when talking about that debt clock. I always thought it would be cool to maybe get some people together, raise some money, and we put up our own asset clock right next to that debt clock. I thought that would be very, very cool, because it's misleading, and it's purposely misleading, and the intention of that is to scare people and to freak people out. And that's what it does. Every time you hear a report on the national debt in the media, it is always put out there in a very frightening manner to get people scared and to get people to freak out about it. And naturally, because there's a high level of ignorance when talking about this, people ordinarily and naturally equate it to their own personal finances, and it's not the same thing. So the debt is not on an unsustainable path. It's wrong for him to say that. It's ignorant for him to say that. It's also ignorant for him to say that the feds would not be able to conduct monetary policy if it keeps on going this way. And all it does is it gives ammunition to the lawmakers to do something, either cut back on spending or try to lower the debt and the deficit, and that is massively deflationary. I'm telling you what, some people on here, I got to say this, because some of you on here have accused me of being a perma bull, of just saying all the time it's bullish, it's bullish. No, that's not true. The reason I'm bullish, and you should know this by now, or you should accept this by now, even if you don't like me, is the fact that I've been saying government spending at over $5 trillion annually is a massive, massive fiscal support to the economy. Now, if they were to cut this dramatically, then I'd be the first person on here to say, hey, you got to short the stock market, and you got to stay short the stock market, and everything is going down for a long, long time, and we're going to be in a recession for a long, long time. But those are not the conditions, at least not currently, those are not the conditions we're in. That's not to say we won't eventually maybe see that happen, especially when guys like Powell are out there making statements like this. But for now, that is not the reality that we are operating in. The reality that we are operating in is very supportive to the economy. You got $5 trillion of spending. It keeps going up. You got all these things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense. They keep expanding and spending more and spending more. That is a massive support. Remember, the tide comes up, it lifts everything up. If they start cutting, if they start balancing budgets and all that stuff, believe me, I'll be the first one on here to say you got to go short and everything is going down the tubes. But that's not happening. Anyway, back to Powell. Ridiculous statement, inapplicable. The guy doesn't understand. Either that or he's being purposely subversive. Alright, just wanted to let you know about that. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you back here on Monday. Bye-bye.